Okay, so we are going to begin today the final of the series of lessons that we've been looking at in the time between the Testament, the final dynasty or empire or whatever you want to call it, as we've gone through and we've looked at a series of different ones. We looked at the Babylonian Empire, we looked at the Persian Empire, we looked at the Greek Empire, and then we looked at the Hasmonean Empire, which was the one time in all of that where the Jewish people actually were ruling themselves independently for a period of time. And so now we're going to get to the final of those empires, and it's the one that Daniel describes over in Daniel chapter 2, starting in verse 31. He talks about the statue, the vision of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar has, and he says, "You, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breasts and its arms of silver, its belly and its thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth." And we've gone through and talked about that as you go through that statue progressively, you start with the head of gold, which is Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom of Babylon, the breast and arms of silver, which is the kingdom of Persia, the belly of bronze, a belly of thighs of bronze, I should say, that were the Greek Empire, and finally then we come to the Iron Empire. And I want to make an interesting note here, because on the one hand, you can look at this and say, okay, so the glory, the value of each progressive level of the statue is decreasing, because gold is more precious than silver, silver is more precious than bronze, and bronze is more precious than iron. And that's true. And in fact, Daniel makes that point that yours, to Nebuchadnezzar, yours is the preeminent, the most glorified kingdom. But at the same time, the thing that you want to be aware of is that as you go down in descending order, the parts of the statue become increasingly hard, increasingly strong. Thank you, that was the word I was looking for, because the other word. As metals, gold is a very weak and soft metal. Silver is not a lot better. Bronze is significantly better, but iron is something completely different than all of those in terms of its strength and the damage that it can do.
And is this the one with the feet mixed with iron and clay?
Yes.
That gets weaker all over again.
That's true. It becomes weaker. And so actually then Daniel gets an interpretation of it, talking about that fourth kingdom, and it says, "There will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, and inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. It will crush, in that you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it will be a divided kingdom. But it will have in it the toughness of iron, inasmuch as you saw the iron mixed with common clay. As the toes and the feet were partly of iron and partly of pottery, so some of the kingdom will be strong, and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery." So what we have is this idea that there's going to be a transformation over time of this final empire, that it's going to go from pure steel, or pure iron I should say, to something that is iron mixed with clay, which has strength to it, but also has division. It doesn't actually form properly, and it's brittle in a way that iron alone would not be. And of course, the empire that we're talking about here is Rome. And Rome is historically speaking, the greatest of all of the ancient empires. Now, you can make an argument with regard to the modern empires of either England or of the Soviet Union, but outside of the modern era and possibility of those two, there is little doubt that Rome was the greatest of all of the ancient empires. We're going to go through a very brief overview of Roman history. Roman history spans 10,000 years, well, something like that. That is a little bit more than we want to cover in detail. So the earliest settlements of so by the way, when we talk about Rome, what, what does Rome mean? When we use the word Rome, what are we talking about? There's actually several answers, so go ahead and give me whatever you think the right answer is.
Well, it's the capital city of the kingdom in Italy.
Okay, so Rome is the city. What else is it? When we use the word Rome.
It's considered the capital of Christendom.
Okay, so in one context, sometimes it's used interchangeably with the papacy, Rome. What else though? If you talk to a historian, what might they use the word Rome to describe?
It was I don't know how you would put it in words, but it was the center of commerce, the center of culture. It became the center of the entire cultivated world.
Okay, that's true, but that doesn't really tell us what. That's an idea. It's an accurate idea. What I'm asking you more, so when Paul says I'm a Roman citizen, what does he mean by Rome or Roman? He's a citizen of what? The city of Rome?
No.
Okay, the government of Rome. What particular government was he a citizen of? Do we know?
The Caesars.
Okay, by the time Paul was around, it was the Roman Empire. Before Rome was an empire, what was it?
Monarchy.
It was a monarchy before the thing that was in the middle. What was it in the middle between monarchy and empire? Nope, that's either monarchy or empire. This is actually not a dictatorship. In the middle of it was something else. What was it? What was it? Do we know? The Roman Republic, that's right, okay? So Rome transitions from where it begins, which is basically these early settlements. There are settlements that are dated back to around 8000 BC in what would become the city of Rome. They find archaeological evidence of not just of people moving through, but of actual settlements, people living there for a long period of time. That puts it at probably one of the oldest inhabited sites in Europe. Now, there are places particularly in Africa and in the Middle East that significantly outstrip it by 3,000 to 5,000 years, but the earliest settlements in Rome make it one of the oldest continuously inhabited sites in Western Europe, in all of Europe. So sometime after these settlements first started coming together, the city of Rome came into existence. Now, it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly when the city of Rome came into existence, because the city of Rome was it probably was like a lot of cities. It wasn't like somebody, a lot of ancient cities, it wasn't like somebody came and said, I'm going to make a city here. It's just that you get enough people together and enough commerce and enough things like that, and gradually you go from being just a bunch of people living in the same area to a town and then eventually to a city. Although, in the case of Rome, there's a myth about Rome. This is the same thing, I knew that happened. The founding myth of Rome. And the myth of Rome is that Rome was founded on April 21st, 753 BC by by a guy named Romulus. Now Romulus, along with his brother Remus, were mythologically speaking sons of the Roman deity Mars. Anybody know what Mars was responsible for as a god? War. Okay, Mars was the god of war. And so it's not surprising that at whatever point the Romans decided to start associating themselves with a god, they picked the god of war because they turned out to be really good at it. But Romulus and Remus were brothers. They were twins who were born to again, this is mythology, to a Vestal virgin who was seduced by Mars, the god of war, and then ultimately they were raised by a she-wolf. And then they were suckled by a she-wolf, I should say, and then this is the mythology there, and then they were rescued or adopted by a shepherd named Faustulus. Now the reason all this happened was because the father of Romulus and Remus's mother, their grandfather, had received a prophecy basically that his children would rule over this great area.
And this is all mythology. This
is all mythology, yeah. There's no historical evidence to suggest that people actually exist. So he had received this prophecy that his descendants would rule over this great area. So his son, the brother of this woman who was supposedly seduced by Mars, killed his father in order to, deposed his father and locked him away in order to take over the kingdom, and then to make sure that his sister would not have children that could be descendants of their father. He had made her become a Vestal virgin, which they're not supposed to have relations with anyone, so hence no children. So he tried to prevent that, and that was why this whole mysterious thing had to happen, where the kids had to be raised through some secondary medium and raised by the shepherd, because then that way the evil king would not find out about it until it was too late. And sure enough, Romulus and Remus grew up, and Romulus at some point killed Remus, and then Romulus took over the family lineage and founded Rome. Well, first he kicked his evil uncle off the throne, got his dad back on the throne, and then he founded Rome. So anyway, that's the mythology. And again, the date that is given for that is very specific, April 21st, 753. So that's the mythology. The reality is that while the exact date is probably not entirely accurate, the fact that it puts it somewhere between 800 and 700 is probably pretty accurate, because that's when the city of Rome did actually become a city. And the city of Rome grew, and it gradually became a kingdom. And so, again, the kingdom of Rome, the date is given as 753 because that's the date that, the mythology says, but what exactly it started at, we don't know, but it's between 753 and 509 BC, Rome, the city, controlled a significant amount of territory around itself. That was called the Kingdom of Rome. Now, this Roman kingdom, as we're talking about, at this point we're talking about things that happened more than 2,500 years ago. And there is actually not just archaeological evidence of this, there is actually preserved ruins of this kind of stuff. One of them is the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum came into being somewhere around 700 BC. So the Roman Forum is over 2,700 years old. This is what it looks like. How many of you have been to Rome? Anybody been to Rome? Okay, so that would just be me. Okay, so this was I didn't take this picture. To be fair, I got it from a fair usage site. But this is the Roman Forum. The Roman Forum was a place where basically Romans got together and talked about stuff, and some of their judicial things took place there. It was a place of basically gathering and commerce. A lot of trade went on there and stuff like that.
This Kingdom of Rome period, is that the monarchy you talked about?
Yes, that's the original monarchy, is the Kingdom of Rome. So the Roman Forum was built during this time, as well as the Circus Maximus, which is not anything like Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey circuses, but rather it's a giant oval track that was used for racing horses and chariots. And the Circus Maximus was created, this is one end of it. If you look and you see kind of going down both ends, behind it is the curve here. It goes down to the other end and comes back again. And the Circus Maximus was created originally in 600 BC, and then it was also expanded during the Roman Republic era, as was the Roman Forum. And that kind of gets us to the next thing that happened, was that after the Kingdom of Rome had been around for 240 some odd years, the Romans got sick of it and kicked the last king out, and created a Roman Republic. That was actually founded on principles that were basically copied or borrowed from the Greeks and from some of the Greek quasi-democracies. We wouldn't necessarily exactly recognize what the Greeks did as democracy today, but it's closer than anybody else had ever come before. And so the Roman Republic was made up of, there was the Senate, which was the primary legislative body. There were no kings. What they did have was consuls. And these consuls were elected to one-year terms. There were two of them. And these two consuls were given tremendous authority to conduct wars, to carry out government policy. The Senate were the ones that actually defined what the government was going to do, but the consuls were kind of like what our original vision of the presidency was. The presidency would be the acting party that would carry out the will of the government. And so these consuls were doing these things. To be a consul, you had to be pretty important. I don't mean popular or telegenic. You had to be good at what you did, and for the most part what that meant is you had to be good at leading people into battle. Because Rome's primary way to become a citizen, to become important in Rome, was either to own a bunch of land or to be really good at war. And so their consuls, by and large, were people who had had great success in leading troops and had become generals and had conquered territory or had fought important battles and things like that. And so these consuls, and in fact most of the Senate, was made up of individuals who had themselves had at least some kind of military career. To be a citizen in Rome was not like it is to be a citizen in this country. In this country, you're a citizen because why?
Born here.
Because you're born here. okay? Or you can be naturalized or different things like that. But the primary way is to be born here. Being born in the Roman Republic was not a sufficient way to become a Roman citizen. To be born into, even to be born to a citizen of the Roman Republic was no guarantee that you would be a citizen. There were several different ways to become a Roman citizen, but the primary one was to enlist and to carry out a certain term of military service. There were other ways to do it. In some cases, certain kinds of public service would do it. Doing a particularly important thing for Rome or for one of its, its government agencies, or for someone who is important in Rome already, could also earn you citizenship. So, for example, if you have personally foiled an assassination attempt on a consul, you'd probably get citizenship out of that, even if you hadn't done anything else, because of the significance of what you did. So, being a consul was really important. Being a citizen was significant as well, because citizenship carried with it certain rights. That we see this in Paul's case on a number of different occasions, where he exercises these Roman rights. Citizens of Rome had rights that basically prevented them or guaranteed them trials, guaranteed them a certain process of law that even the average Roman inhabitant didn't have, even if, not just if you were a slave, but just being an inhabitant of Rome. So being the Roman Republic introduced a number of ideas that were relatively new. Like I said, many of them were sort of borrowed from the Greeks, but they expanded on this idea. And the Roman Republic lasted from 509 BC until 60 BC. So it lasted for 449 years, 450 years almost, basically, which is an exceptionally long period of time when you think about our modern day way of thinking about time.
203 years longer than the United States.
So far, yes. Now, we aren't done yet, but, but it's fairly impressive. So,
amazing.
now one of the things that's interesting about Rome just in general is when we talk about Rome, and I mentioned this idea that the city itself has been continuously inhabited for essentially 10,000 years now. Rome, and in Rome, you don't think about the passage of time the same way you do most other places. One of the most striking things that happened when I was in Rome the first time, I went over there as part of a semester-long studies program in Europe that I went on when I was a senior in college. And every city that we would go to, we would have designated travel periods where the whole class would go certain places. Now, on the weekends, we kind of travel wherever we wanted to, but on certain these designated travel times, the entire group of students that was there would go somewhere, and the school had set it up in a very smart way. And the way they set it up is that the first day, or at least the first half day that you spend in this given city, you would have a tour guide, and we would be on a bus, and we would look all over the city, and then the tour guide would kind of point out important things and get us familiarized with the city. And then the rest of the time that we were there, we could do it ourselves. We had bus passes and different ways to get around, so we could look and see what interested us. But that way, we got a feel for the city before we actually got sort of turned loose on the city and, got lost or whatever else might happen. So we were taking the bus tour around the city, and the tour guide was talking about all the different things that we were seeing, the buildings and the ancient nature of these buildings. The Colosseum is, dates from 60 or 70 AD, so it's closing in on, it's over 1900 years old. She's pointing out the Roman Forum and some of these different things, these ancient things. And one of the things she points out is she says, and she showed us there's a piazza, a city square that was designed and built by Michelangelo. And right behind it, she says, and there is the city hall that so-and-so designed 600 years ago. And the teacher said, now, do they still use that? And she said, of course they do. It's only 600 years old. and when you hear someone say that, you realize they're thinking about time in a way that we don't think about time. And the age of things, it's a perfectly good building. It's only 600 years old, And there are apartment buildings in Rome that are 400 years old that people are still living in because that's just how it works. For one thing, it's hard to convince the city council that you should tear any building down that's that old. And they were well built, and so they just keep doing it. So this city is ancient, and the Republic is ancient as well. And it lasted for a long time. Now, with that said, and somehow I lost no, actually I didn't, I take that back. So over Revelation chapter 17, some of the references in Revelation to Rome are made clear because of what we know about the city. So in Revelation chapter 17, John is having his revelation, and he says, one of the seven angels spoke with me, saying, come here, and I will show you the judgment of the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed immorality, and those who dwell on the earth were made drunk with the wine of her immorality. That phrase, sits on many waters, is kind of an interesting phrase. Because when you think about Rome, Rome actually only has one river flowing through it, the River Tiber. There are other capitals that have several different rivers going through them. But what's interesting is the parallel between that phrase, sits on many waters, and what Jeremiah says about the original actual Babylon. And he says, the Lord has both purposed and performed what he spoke concerning the inhabitants of Babylon. O you who dwell by many waters, abundant in treasures, your end has come. And here again, Babylon doesn't have a whole bunch of rivers near it, but what Babylon did have was a network of canals that were constructed all the way through it. And what Rome had were aqueducts that were constructed all over the Roman Empire to carry water around. It was one of the major engineering feats that they created that enabled them to irrigate places that would otherwise have been dry, to create food where there would not otherwise have been food. And it was one of the reasons that the empire was so enduring. And so when John makes this reference in Revelation to this harlot who sits on many waters, that's the first clue that he's talking about Rome. But then he goes on and he says, this is the angel, carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast full of blasphemous names, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was clothed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. And he carried me away in the spirit. Oh, I think somehow I've gotten some slides that got duplicated. So she had in her hand a gold cup full of abominations and of the unclean things of her immorality, and on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of the abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints. Now by this time in history, when John is writing this, Babylon is no longer, it might still exist kind of, but it's no longer a seat of power. It's not a place that power emanates from or that people travel to. So he's not talking about the original city of Babylon. But he goes on, he says, when I saw her, I wondered greatly. And we kind of wonder, what is this that he's seeing? And the angel said to me, why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carries her, which has the 7 heads and the 10 horns. And the beast you saw was and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss and go to destruction. And boy, that doesn't that just clarify right up for you? The beast was and is not and is about to come up out of the abyss. And those who dwell on the earth, whose name has not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, will wonder when they see the beast that he was and is not and will come. This phrasing is phrasing that speaks to the notion that whatever this beast is, whatever he's referring to, it is something that is non-physical. It is something that is spiritual. This kind of phrasing of does and doesn't exist is only ever used to describe spiritual concepts. Most often, it talks about things like, it's used to describe God when it says he was and is to come. That is a different way of phrasing it, or a different phraseology than here, but it's almost certainly the beast itself is something that is spiritual, something that is not simply physical. The woman is the physical aspect of it. He continues and said, here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads of the beast, that is, are 7 mountains on which the woman sits, and they are 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come, and when he comes he must remain a little while. This is significant because what it's saying is, so this woman sits on 7 mountains. And the interesting thing is that Rome is often referred to as the city of 7 hills. It has 7 hills that make up the center part of Rome. The Aventine Hill, the Caelian Hill, the Capitoline Hill, the Esquiline Hill, the Palatine Hill. Oh, that's the Palatine Hill right there. They built a bunch of palaces on there to the Caesars and to people even before that. And then finally, the Quirinal Hill and the Viminal Hill. These 7 hills are the hills of Rome. And it becomes pretty obvious that what John is trying to convey is this idea that we're talking about Rome. Now, John can't just write down, Rome is who I'm talking about, because Rome is in the process of persecuting the saints, and the last thing in the world you need to be doing is passing around a letter that calls them out by name. So he's using... That's true, they did. And so, that was the least of what they did, any of the disciples, any of the apostles. All the rest of them are dead by this time. So he's writing an apocalyptic terminology, partly because that is the nature of apocalyptic terminology, that it doesn't use specificity and it doesn't use word names usually, but he uses some very explicit terminology that makes it very clear that he's talking about Rome. By the way, the other most common name that Rome has been given historically is the Eternal City, because of how long it's been around. Anyway, okay, back to this very brief overview. So we're in the Roman Republic era, 509 to 60 BC. Now, at the start of this era, Rome basically controls, is what we would think of as a city-state. It controls the city and it controls the territory around the city to a certain extent, but it by no means even controls what we would think of as Italy, that boot that Italy makes up. It doesn't control that yet. So what happens then in 280 BC is Rome kind of transitions from being, we're happy with where we're at, to we've decided to conquer everyone. And I don't know exactly what switch got flipped in their head that made them do that, but they begin with the Pyrrhic War. They fight a war against, if you've ever heard the term Pyrrhic victory, it's because actually the other side won a battle against them that cost them so many troops and generals and everything else that was really easy for the Romans to mop up and finish the rest of the war. But they fight the Pyrrhic War, and by the end of the Pyrrhic War, they control all of Italy, or all of what we think of as Italy. So this is basically 218. So the Pyrrhic War is fought, between 280 and 275. And once they're done with the Pyrrhic War, they try to spend their time consolidating their rule. So this is Rome right here, okay? This is Carthage. Carthage is the other big empire besides the Greeks over here. We haven't talked about them because they don't really have anything to do with the Israel and the biblical stories particularly. But this area, this and this are the three big parts of the Greek Empire that are left over. The Seleucid Empire that we've been talking about a lot is right here. The Ptolemaic Empire was the other one that controlled the area around Jerusalem, was right here. And these are basically this is the Macedonian Empire, and this is, I forget what they're called, but the other Greek Empire. So Rome has control of their territory and not the rest of it at that point. And then everything goes nuts. So the Roman Republic, they have the Pyrrhic War from 280 to 275. Then they begin the Punic Wars that last from 264 until 146. 118-year-long war. Well, series of wars. They're not like back-to-back. But the Punic Wars are fought against Carthage. Anybody know who Hannibal is? Not the cannibal guy from the movies, and not the guy from the A-Team either. Hannibal was the greatest general of his era from Carthage. He was the one that initially brought the elephants to fight against the Romans and ultimately lost because the elephants just didn't do so good when he got them all the way over there. Actually, they didn't even make it all the way there. They got into the Alps and they died. But he fought, the Punic Wars were fought against Carthage, and gradually Rome conquered Carthage. So that was all that area off to the west. Then they fought the Macedonian Wars from 214 to 148. Notice that these are overlapping. They fought the Macedonian Wars, and basically that allowed them to conquer most of mainland Greece, of Greece there, the Macedonian area. Then they fought the Achaean War in 146, and that was the war that actually finalized their conquest of mainland Greece. So, looking at this map here, this is the red. The dark red is Rome, where it started at the beginning of all this. By the time the Punic Wars and the Macedonian Wars are done, they control all of this area over here, they control all of this area here, and they control a little bit of North Africa as well. All of that belongs to Rome at that point. And that is about 140 BC, something like that. Notice an interesting thing here. Rome is fighting at certain times, they are fighting 3 different wars simultaneously. It is very difficult to fight 3 different wars simultaneously. But Rome was really good at organization and at finding ways to field multiple armies with multiple generals, and they were able to do that. For quite a lot of their existence, Rome was able to fight multiple wars, and in fact, there are a number of civil wars that are going on here as well that I didn't even put in here because we want to get done with this sometime, in the next day or a week or two. So they fight this series of wars, they conquer this area. Then they go on and they fight the Cimbrian War from 113 to 101 BC, the Jugurthine War from 112 to 106 BC. These wars are fought, the Cimbrian War is pushing further into the Greek Empire, into the Seleucid Empire and down south as well. The Jugurthine War is fought against some of the nations there in what used to be Persia and Babylon. The Mithridatic War, get this one wrong, Mithridatic Wars are fought against Egypt, some of Egypt, as well as some of the Seleucid Empire. And finally, the Gallic Wars are fought between 58 and 50 BC. And during the Gallic Wars, they conquer basically all of what we think of as Central Europe, France, those different areas in through there. So by the time they're done with this series of wars, they have now conquered, this is the Gallic Wars, that's what gets to this area up here. See actually that is later, I don't want to get to that yet. This gets them down in here, they control Egypt, they control all of this area, basically the rest of what Greece still had. And they don't actually have to conquer the Seleucid Empire for the most part. The Seleucid Empire just died. We kind of went through and talked about some of the things that happened to them. Basically, they just get more and more racked by civil war until they basically fall apart and Rome just sort of takes over from them. So by the time we get to 44 BC, Rome controls this huge area of territory. Now some of these areas they won't consolidate their control on for a little while longer, but they control this huge area of territory around the Mediterranean Sea. Now, if you were paying attention, the Roman Republic went from 509 to 60 BC. And if you see on there, at least one of those wars took place after the Roman Republic was apparently over. So the question becomes, well, what happens to the Roman Republic? And the answer is that the Roman Republic becomes increasingly corrupt, and increasingly one of the problems that they have is that they're really good at fielding these amazing armies and developing these amazing generals. The one thing that they're not very good at is finding a way to make the armies loyal to the Senate as opposed to whatever general happens to be leading them. And so this keeps happening. They have these generals that become really, really good at what they do. And then the people, the army wants to do what they tell them to. And historically, those generals were men of honor who were dedicated to the Republican ideal. And as a result of that, they didn't take advantage of this opportunity. But the final few generations of the Roman Republic include two of their greatest generals of all time, Pompey and Caesar, and neither of them are quite as noble about this whole thing. So both of them develop these armies that want to follow them and want to do what they tell them to, and because of that, rather than having these two guys serve as consuls, they form something called a triumvirate. They, with one other guy, form something called the Triumvirate. The third guy was a guy named Crassus. Crassus was really rich, and he was kind of bankrolling the whole thing. But Caesar and Pompey create this triumvirate. Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey. These are the three guys here. Caesar's on the left, Crassus is in the middle, Pompey is on the end. Well, Crassus is also a general. He's just not nearly as good at it as Caesar and Pompey. So in 53 BC, he leads an army to a place called Carrhae, and he gets killed. So he's done. So now we don't have a triumvirate anymore. We've got a biumvirate. But Pompey and Caesar really, 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 really hate each other. And so very quickly, this goes from let's work together to let's have a civil war. So Caesar starts a civil war. He's got all of his troops. He's been in the process of conquering Gaul during this period of time, and he's had great success. And so when he comes back from Gaul, he's a hero, and the people want to make him the leader, and Pompey doesn't want that, so Pompey fights back against him, but Pompey gets assassinated down in Egypt, where he's gathering his forces in 48 BC. Now, Caesar didn't want him to be assassinated. He wanted to defeat him in battle. He didn't want him assassinated, particularly in the sort of embarrassing way that it happened. So he's actually very upset about this. But he continues to have to fight the civil war for another 4 years against the remainder of Pompey's followers and adherents and everything else. So now we've got no more Pompey. Caesar is left, but the battle goes on for a while.
Is Caesar a title or his actual?
So Julius Caesar, Gaius Julius Caesar, is actually his name. What will happen is, though, that his later, the people who follow in his footsteps as emperor will use the title Caesar as their title rather than as his name. So because he was the first one to do it, they kind of borrowed his name, and so everybody is called Caesar whatever after that, but it was actually his name. So Julius Caesar is his name. So Julius Caesar is triumphant in 44 BC. He wins the civil wars, he takes over, and then he gets killed by assassination like 3 months later. So it's a very, very short triumph. But he was the emperor. Well, he didn't actually declare himself emperor, but he was he was in charge for that short period of time. Once he dies, a second triumvirate is formed, made up of Mark Antony, Octavian, and a guy named Lepidus. And if you notice, now I realize that a lot of you are not historians, but it's funny because as I'm going through this, I know the names of two of the guys in the triumvirate every time, and you can bet who dies first when you know the names of two of them, but you don't know the name of the third guy. And sure enough, so we've got these four guys, they didn't have nice statues for them. We got these four guys, Mark Antony on the left, Octavian in the middle, Lepidus on the end, and as you can guess from the fact that Lepidus is the least known name, he gets in an exile in 36 BC, so about halfway into the Triumvirate. The rest, the other two members don't want anything more to do
How
with
are
it.
these men chosen?
These men are chosen because they're generals, they're successful, and so people follow them, and they gather a large enough following, and it's kind of like, well, the Senate really doesn't want to stand in their way because they know they're going to be killed or whatever else if it happens, and so it's kind of one of those things where they take the power, but it's also kind of handed to them because the Senate is no longer functional. The Senate is operating a lot like our modern day Congress and how our Congress does. They can't pass a budget, they can't get much of anything done. And so there's a vacuum of power that is ideal for somebody who's strong enough to step into. Now the triumvirates happen first because there's no one person who by themselves is strong enough at any given moment. And then it kind of whittles it down. And so the first triumvirate, Caesar gradually takes over, but initially he was not in a position to do that. He had a huge army that was loyal to him, but he didn't have enough money to pay their wages. And same thing with Pompey. So they needed Crassus because Crassus had the money to pay their wages. But once they got themselves to where they were this triumvirate, they could dip directly into Rome's wealth, and they didn't need Crassus anymore, so that was it for him. Well, he died in battle, but they didn't care. And the same thing is kind of happening here. All three of these guys are successful. Lapidus is kind of the odd man out, who's not nearly as well considered as the other two. And because the Senate can't get anything done, and because the fear that another tyrant will step up, they allow this triumvirate to be formed because it worked so well the first time. So you have Mark Antony and you have Octavian as the two that are left. Now, Mark Antony and Octavian also hate each other. This is kind of, they didn't start off that way, but they come to hate each other. And eventually they fight a war called the War of Actium. It takes place between 32 and 30 BC. Mark Antony is probably best known to the average American as the guy who killed himself along with Cleopatra in the movie that what's her name started, Elizabeth Taylor, I think. That is unfortunate because that is a sad, sad way to understand that aspect of history, but whatever. So this war takes place, and Cleopatra and Egypt are significant because they are the ones that are bankrolling and supporting Mark Antony. So Mark Antony is being supported by the southern parts of the Roman Empire, and Octavian, who is, by the way, Caesar's grandson, I believe, is being supported by more of the central and major part of the empire. And gradually, over time, Octavian becomes more and more successful. Finally, he defeats Mark Antony and conquers Alexandria, which is where Mark Antony and Cleopatra had come to live. And so Mark Antony kills himself. And Cleopatra also kills herself because she doesn't want to become a trophy to be paraded through the streets of Rome when Octavian goes back to Rome as a victor. So I think we're going to stop here because it looks like we're having some issues back there, and I don't want to just keep talking right through the middle of that. So we're going to end our class right here. So pick up and finish this up next week, this part.